Turning now to our guests in the studio, Yakov Lapin, security analyst and host of the Ross Handler Report, and of course, our international affairs analyst, Dan Perry, who's the former Europe and Middle East editor of the Associated Press. Okay, so a lot of rhetoric right now coming out of the mouth of U.S. President Donald Trump. I think the question right now is what has actually changed, because the midterm elections are still coming up. We know that there's, not a lot of American public support for renewed warfare. Is there something specific that happened that is making it so that Trump is making these statements now?
I think you have two timelines in the Middle East. One says that nothing can happen until the midterms, and that is just too much, because at this point, Trump has to. The other timeline is that we can't wait that long because the Iranians are pushing the envelope and making it impossible for the Americans to not accelerate a retribution to their actions well before the midterms. I think Trump must have concluded that the damage being done, and in general, American interests, beyond the political aspect, if we can believe that Trump can think that way, but maybe he can at times, or maybe it's his ego, because he was looking like such a loser, necessitates action, basically.
The Strait of Hormuz has really become the focal point of this latest round of fighting. Iran does not seem to be willing to give up its focus on maintaining control of the strait. So is there really any room for negotiation at this point?
Not unless you want to set an international precedent that would mess up every other international choke point, from the Singapore Strait to the Malacca Strait to the Strait of Taiwan to, there's no end to it. Maybe Gibraltar. You can't. Now, the thing is, the strait is very narrow, and theoretically, each country, Oman and Iran, have 12 nautical miles, and that would overlap. There's no water in between. But by established precedent, backed by international law, plus the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, that every country is signed to, other than, by the way, the US and Iran, practically. Iran cannot possibly block the strait, charge anything. The absurdity is, of course, that Trump, in his confusion, inconsistency, and possibly ignorance, claimed at some point this week that the US would charge tolls or fees, which undermines the entire case against Iran. Right. I watched that, and I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a deep fake. It turned out to be true, but then he walked it back 24 hours later. That's just Trump, and this is the army we have.
All right. Saudi Arabia has not been, you could say, exercising its muscles, even though it has been targeted, although much less, by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Is this perhaps a message being sent to the Islamic Republic, or, posturing for what could be potential future attacks? What do you make of this?
I think it's consistent with the current goals of the U.S., which are, A, to always be exporting weapons to friendly countries, because Trump loves weapon sales and revenues, to strengthen Saudi Arabia and keep them on side, because they're a little bit wobbly, and they've, throughout even recent months, hinted at times of a rapprochement with Iran, enable them to defend themselves, and I don't know if the Abraham Accord expansion is still in play, but they want to keep it in play somehow and keep Saudi firmly in the American orbit. All of that is achieved with the messaging that you're alluding to. But I have to agree with Yakov. I mean, in 2010, I remember Congress announced that over $100 billion worth of sales had already happened. When Trump visited Saudi Arabia last time, again, they spoke in general terms and not necessarily believable. It's coming from Trump. Also, again, of $100 billion or more in deals. So 1.5 billion or whatever it is, 2 maybe now, doesn't really move the needle. But the timing is interesting. Announcing it is interesting. Obviously, at a particular moment when the Gulf countries are coming under attack, is not irrelevant. So the question really is whether any of the Gulf countries are really going to be willing to take part in the coalition of the willing if the war resumes in truth, and they will undoubtedly be attacked. And then do they continue basically just absorbing it and doing very little, except for occasional undeclared, almost subterranean UAE action, or will they be part of the coalition the way Israel was? That's the big test. I do not know, and I don't think anyone knows, if this deal is part of a promise or an agreement that should be the case, but it should be.
Is Trump's Gaza peace plan actually a plan, or is it really just lip service at this point?
I don't know. I really don't. I mean, Trump said Hamas agreed to disarm, that they agreed to his plan, which included that as the key point from Israel's perspective. I never heard Hamas agree. As Yaakov says, it's not so surprising that they're trying to avoid that condition and indeed rearming. A lot depends on what we do next. I have been expecting something to be done, but the Americans for, I guess, 7 months now, maybe 8, have done nothing about it. And obviously they've been distracted by the Iran issue and so forth. Look, I want to say something about this matter of the operation today. Yes, Hamas hasn't disarmed. That's terrible. Yes, it would be great to not only pick off Hamasniks trying to smuggle weapons, but also create a plan whereby maybe the population is allowed to exit the Hamas area, and then Israel completes the job in an area that is civilian-free. I'm sure Hamas would try to prevent that from happening, but that at least will be a plan. Mm-hmm. But here's what's not a plan. I believe Israel's killed about 1,000 civilians since this deal went into effect. That's not a plan. Right. I have been arguing for years now that the idea of preventing civilian casualties in Gaza is not just a moral imperative and a Jewish imperative. It's also politically wise and geopolitically wise. And all these tough guys in these TV studios call me naive because there's no alternative, and it's actually a good ratio and all this other nonsense. Because now everyone's upset about something that is even more strategic for Israel than getting rid of Hamas, which is that the U.S. support for Israel is desperately in danger. And that is directly attached not just to the nefarious propaganda campaigns that are being run against Israel and are so unfair, but also the fact that Israel killed tens of thousands of civilians unapologetically. So what's happening today is that the army hasn't replied. The most coherent answer I heard to why a bunch of Gazans were killed today is from Yaakov Lapin at I24. That's crazy. The army isn't explaining what it's doing. Right. And that is such a colossal failure of public diplomacy. And really, if I speak of diplomacy, it should be the government explaining what they're having the army do, that it is causing Israel immeasurable damage. Polls show that a majority of people under 50 in the U.S. no longer support Israel and support the Palestinians more. Hamas or not Hamas, it almost doesn't matter. This is a catastrophe. And every time civilians are killed in Gaza, Israelis, if they don't care, and I think most of them do care, but even the ones who don't care, probably care about Israel losing support of the U.S. because that would be a strategic cataclysm, actually worse than Hamas remaining in power in Gaza, which is bad.
Well, I mean, I think that what you're saying has been reiterated by many journalists across the world right now. The basic, request for clear explanation from the Israeli army as to what is happening.
Sometimes they almost think journalists should be in power.
I don't know about that.